Hello. I don't think anyone's on right now, but that's okay. Let me post to Twitter and stuff that I'm live. Let me just. I'm live, baby. I wore a blazer so it could be fancy. So I just really like this blazer. Come on, Twitter. I hope everybody's day is going all right. Okay. That's upside down. We'll read this one first. So the first thing we're going to read is I picked some short stories because I figured that they're kind of easier to. You may not understand what's going on, but at least it's nice to listen to. So the first I'm going to be reading is A Merry Spinster by Daniel Lavery. His dead name's on here, so I'm covering it. But yeah. The first story is called, and this is, so it's based on some fairy tales. This is my very favorite thing. Okay. This one is called The Daughter Cells. Daughters are as good a thing as any to populate a kingdom with if you've got them on hand. They don't cost much more than their own upkeep, which you're on the hook for regardless, so it's not a bad strategy to put them to use as quickly as possible. There are, you may know, kingdoms underneath the sea as well as above it, with all manners of governance as it happens. Kings have daughters, and he happened to fill it with his daughters. Another man might have filled it with something else, potato farmers or pop-eyed scholars or merchant marines, but this one filled it with daughters, so there's no use arguing about it now. Each of this man's daughters had a little plot of ground in the central gardens of the underwater city, which she could develop as she liked. Each daughter had use of the land but did not own it. I haven't time to explain to you the way personal property is thought about in states where all borders are by definition liquid. There are other books about that sort of thing. You might call the daughters princesses. I wouldn't. But if it's easier for you, then you might. You might call them something else, too. There are words for such things that live under the sea and haven't legs. You certainly wouldn't think to call them girls if you happened to see them. At any rate, these girls didn't own their own patches of land, but they had the use of them, which made for good practice. The only way to teach the value of something is to give someone the chance to waste it, or at least that was how the thinking went under this particular administration. Hi, Alan. And most of the daughters grew up with a reasonably discerning sense of what was worth something and what wasn't, so that's one point in that philosophy's favor. Most of them didn't farm sea glass either. The youngest of the daughters planted nothing at all in her garden, and no one thought any less of her for it. If a single polyp so much as presented its head above the ground there, she'd twist it out and fling it over the wall before it could so much think of partitioning itself. The cat's freaking out. And saw no reason to force a skill when there are so many others to cultivate. Yeah, if you see my cat in the background, she's probably just gonna be doing parkour or something. You might well ask, and some did, why bother to go to all the trouble patrolling for kelp and rhizomes and bits of eelgrass if you weren't going to grow anything in their place? The point isn't that I'm growing anything else there, at least not at present, she'd always say. There's the whole rest of the sea available to go be a polyp or a rhizome or a bit of eelgrass in. They just can't do it here. I can go look at a flower anywhere without having to put in a lot of effort to grow a poorer version of my own, which everyone has to hear about the worlds above the sea and the ways in which they were variously apportioned and administered. She made her own grandmother tell her all she knew of the ships and of the towns, a great deal, of their fortifications and their distributions of resources, very little, but she didn't mind lying. The defining characteristic, or so it seemed to the youngest daughter, of these places was what a great store its people seemed to set in, declaring one place not another. This country here can never be that country there, and vice versa. All you have to do is put it behind their front door and keep it there, and there's nothing I can do about it? Not unless you are willing to get into a great deal of trouble for the keeping of it, her grandmother said. But that's unreasonable, she said. What right has a front door to keep me from anything? My goodness. I keep clams and things out of my garden, but I don't expect them to stop trying just because I put a few rock doors for anything. Hi. You can't have understood it properly, the girl said. Front doors, her grandmother repeated. They're absolutely mad for them, and their fish are covered in soft scales and roost in stiff pods of kelp that don't move in the slightest and scream at one another from their nests all day long, and everything that lives there hates quiet. All day long, a hot coal rakes its way across the roof of the world, and all night they freeze as little white maggots peep out all over the sky to watch them. It isn't decent, she added, and the general opinion was that she was right. Decent or not, the girl said, I'd like to see it for myself. And you will, said her grandmother. When you're of an age and your affairs are in order, and you have your family's consent, you may sit on the rocks by the coast and watch the ships go by moonlight. Then you will come home, and you can think about what you have seen. At last the girl came of an age, and her affairs were in order, and she had the consent of her family tucked under the wallet strung round her wrist. Now you are grown up, said her grandmother, and you must let me turn you out so everyone who sees you will know your rank. And she placed ropes of nautilus on her neck and ordered 8 solemn oysters to clamp onto her hair. But this hurts so, said the girl, who had never suffered before and did not like it in the least. I would not hurt you unless I could bear the same thing. You're not being asked to do anything without precedent, said her grandmother, and no one likes to hear someone talk about their aches and pains. Have the decency to at least be quiet about it. All the same, the girl said, twisting her mouth, I don't believe I should like to suffer again. As a matter of fact, I don't believe I will suffer again at all. Goodbye, for now at least. And with that, she drew herself up and vanished into the blue haze overhead. The sun had just set before she broke. Mabel, do not touch my water. Still and cool, but the surface of the ship seethed in continual motion against the waves. Dark figures crawled all along the rigging with a great shouting and waving of arms. Lanterns had been tipped up all around the deck and stuffed with fire, and pennants flashed from every spar. A lurching, crashing music tipped over the sides of the ship and scattered on the waves so that the girl sputtered and thrust her head back under the water where everything was blessedly dark and quiet. She swam closer to the cabin windows and looked in through the glass. There, she saw a small crowd of people, not moving about so wildly as the first, but richly dressed, who smiled at each other and spoke in soft voices. Among them was a young prince, for practical purposes, much the same as a daughter, at least to them, her grandmother had said. His rank was obvious from the deference offered him, despite the conspicuous lack of nautilus and clamshells on his person. He was dark-eyed and solemn, or at least civil, and the girl thoroughly approved of him for it. The celebration was for him. It was the prince's birthday, and they were marking it with tremendous merriment, for they had only a single prince to share among all their people. The girl remembered what her grandmother had told her. They aren't made as you and I were made. Here, a king knows exactly the number of daughters or sons, if he wants any, he needs, and produces them as necessary. They have to go a great deal more trouble than that if they want to get up more people, and they can make only 1 or 2 at a time, which makes for a devil of a time of planning, so that sometimes there are too many and sometimes not nearly enough, and always there's the question of who they're going to make new people with. They can't make daughters as individuals or as a body politic, nor bud nor generate colonies as sensible people do. They have to split off into 2 first and commit sexuality against one another. I told you it wasn't decent. When the prince moved from his cabin to the deck, a terrible shouting came from the sailors gathered there, and more than 100 rockets shot out across the bow, singeing the sky with such a brightness that the girl could hardly bear to look. She had to bathe her eyes in salt water before she could open them burning hot all at once. The ship itself was so brilliantly lit that everything on board seemed lost in half radiance, half shadow. No one seemed in the least bit frightened, and everyone who saw the prince smiled at him. In this way, the girl figured he must be lovely, so she smiled at him too. It grew late, yet the girl did not take her eyes from the ship, nor from the prince once they adjusted to the glare. One by one, the lanterns drooped lightless, the music paled, and the ship grew quieter. The sea became restless. Sailors moved in a black line up the mast, seizing at the rigging, but the waves threw themselves to yet greater heights where they were joined by fat lashings of lightning. The sails were soon swamped, and the ship dove down like a swan, and all of it made for great sweeping everyone before it. All around her there was a struggling of limbs and gasping for breath, and the girl felt sorry for complaining about the weight of a few oysters now that she could see how thoroughly everyone around her suffered. I won't complain about them next time, she promised herself. What, Mabel? Now and again she had to swim slightly out of her way to avoid the scattered side effects of the shipwreck. It became so dark she could imagine herself on the seafloor, but then a flash of lightning threw the scene into relief, and she glimpsed the prince sinking below the waves. She brightened at the thought that soon he would be down in her father's country, where she might show him her garden and explain her philosophy of relative value and effective stewardship. After all, she thought, better for him to join us than for us to join him, and if he is only the administrator of his father has, the only administrator his father has, as having one is scarcely better than having none at all. Then she remembered that humans could live only under the strictest of conditions, that their lungs were quite useless and wet, so that by the time he reached her father's house, he'd be quite dead and unable to learn anything about her philosophies at all, much less help implement them. So he had better not drown. She dove among the beams of the ruined ship and found him drifting a few lengths below, tangled in a bit of sail. His eyes were closed, and he seemed not to take a bit of interest in the goings-on around him, for there was still a great deal of thrashing going on just under the waves. The girl, being fair-minded, was careful not to attribute this to indifference, and so did not hold his lack of curiosity against him, but... Yes, Mabel, what is it? The girl, being fair-minded, was careful not to attribute this to indifference, and so did not hold his lack of curiosity against him, but tucked him squarely under her left arm and made for shore. The prince remained similarly useless once they reached the shore, and since his head seemed determined to loll about on its neck. Mabel, what is it? She's having a crisis. The prince remained sweet at this. She was compelled to steady him with one hand on either side of his face. His eyes still did not open, but his mouth hung slack, so she closed it. You're very quiet, the girl told him. She frowned meditatively. I don't mind it. You may kiss me if you like. The prince said nothing at all to that, so she kissed his forehead and pushed his damp hair and kissed him again. The prince's assets, silence, introspection, slowness to judgment, pliability, all spoke of good breeding and more than compensated for his lack of seaworthiness. He also had, it seemed, the quality of loveliness, or at least, the girl thought, is recognizably lovely to others of his own kind when he is awake, which was much the same thing. Soon the morning had scrubbed both storm and ship clean from the horizon, and still the prince's eyes did not open. She had never seen anyone who lived above water so placid before. It seemed eminently sensible, and so she decided to love him for it. She was delighted that she'd been away from home less than a day, and already she had found something useful to do. Considering further delay unnecessary, the girl dove back into the sea and tucked herself just beneath the waves so that she might not have to see him wake up. A little farther down the shore was a long, low building, and a number of people surged out of its doors onto the sand and busied themselves about the prince. One of them sank next to him and pressed his hand tenderly. He soon opened his eyes and sat up, and the activity on the beach consequently increased. When she saw the prince disappear behind the front doors of the building, the girl considered him unlikely to drown again, so she swam farther out into the waves, flipped over neatly, and she had kept his lungs from getting wet. This made him hers, according to the laws of more commonsensical people. It certainly made him more hers than anyone else's, which meant there was... If human beings are not drowned, said the girl to her grandmother when she'd been thoroughly scrubbed and feted, can anything else kill them? Are they like seagrass or like seals? Will the same one return again if I yank it up by the roots, or will it die? Humans die, said the grandmother, and humans suffer too, for they lead short lives, and when they are dead, no one eats them. They are stuffed in boxes and hidden in the dirt, or else set on fire and turned into cinders, so no one else can make any use of them. They are a prodigiously selfish race and consider themselves their own private property, even in death. The prince would never be so miserly as to deny himself to any fellow citizen, whether he is living or dead, I am sure, the girl said. For I could never love anyone who does not make him promise to let us eat him when he is dead, as you and I will be eaten. No, he is the only prince they have at all up there. He has no sisters or colleagues to share his burden or offer him advice. It is a singular place, and everyone seems quite determinedly alone. And I think he will be grateful to learn that there are more reciprocal ways of living. They are powerfully ungenerous, her grandmother agreed. They do not think of the future as we do. Each one keeps a little soul all locked away for himself, and once their bodies are used up, their souls go off somewhere else no one else can reach and continue along in perfect isolation forever and ever. But what a terrible waste that must be, cried the girl. I can think of a dozen better things I could do with a soul. More's the pity that you haven't got one, for I've no doubt you could put a soul to a great deal of good use. I should like to get a soul, said the girl. The prince has one already. I might have his. I have put my mouth on his mouth, and surely that counts for something. Getting a soul takes suffering and solitude, said her grandmother. We are much better off than they are, no matter how much they squander their birthright. I've suffered already, said the girl. Not much, perhaps, but I should still like to get something for my suffering. You could, said her grandmother, if the prince were to love you such that his own people were nothing to him, and if he forgot the two parents who made him, and if all his thoughts were yours, and if he were to wed to you with his full heart, and then his dark eyes closed, and she thought about gaining something from him. She considered his soul quite her own already, minus a few necessary formalities. The very next day, the girl swam out from her father's house to visit the sea witch. She didn't call her a sea witch, obviously, because people who live there don't go around affixing the word sea to everything any more than you would speak of visiting your land doctor or your dirt grocer. She didn't call her a witch either, as a matter of fact, but no translation is perfect, and for our present purposes, there's not much more you need to understand about the sort of person the sea witch was. After all, it was true that she lived in the sea, and it was true that she could make things happen that other people couldn't. She was a very effective and useful person, which meant, as far as the girl was concerned, although you will remember that you would never call her a girl if you got a good look at her, a sea witch was just another sort of king's daughter. Maybe you better watch it. Now here is what the sea witch looked like. She was hinged neatly in the middle. She could jump very high by bending and straightening her great foot. She could whistle through her teeth and hit a swimming fish 100 yards away, and she had no head at all. She was lovely to look at. And here is what the sea witch's house looked like. It was composed of 100 white chimneys that shot out merry little clouds of particulate all night and day. The chimneys were crusted in mottled bits of iron and long drips of salt, which had no face at all. Only pale, slender midguts and foreguts that concluded in a red mouth that danced in the current. The mouths turned and followed carefully everything that swam by. The sea witch's home was bounded by a dead brine pool and old dripping waterfalls, and a soft shower of marine snow was always pattering lightly against the roof of her chimney palace. It was too hot and too cold and too wriggling for anyone else to live there, so the sea witch owned it. She turned it out quite neatly, too. The girl felt the worms twitching underneath as she swam, mouthing at her limbs softly as she passed over. She went faster until she came to a chimney that would have looked to you like a squat stone beehive. It didn't look like a beehive to her, but what she thought it looked like wouldn't mean anything to you. Anyhow, it was in this chimney that the witch lived, and so it was this chimney that the girl came to. Good day and well met, said the witch, spitting a long stream of nacre on the floor in welcome. Come in, then, and bring your business with you. This voice is going to kill my throat. Good day and thanks, mother, the girl said, who was polite as well as efficient. I'm off to get a soul, and a prince besides, if I can manage it. Can't see what you need to have one for, the witch said. What will you do with it? Oh, I haven't got any plans exactly, the girl said. Only I'm good at figuring out what to do with things, and the ones that have the things to begin with don't seem interested in putting them to use, just in keeping them there where they already are. The witch nodded and made an approximate gesture that involved folding and unfolding herself quickly. I can't abide selfishness either, and it comes to that. Well, good luck to you, and if you manage to bring either one back, I'll look forward to a good meal in your company. But better a plate of herbs where love is than a stalled ox or hatred therewith. The witch didn't say ox or love either, if it comes to that, but there are other books that better explain that sort of thing. Hadn't you better be reading some of them? The witch looked the girl up and down with a critical eye. You know, by now I think that the witch had no eyes, and I need not explain every little difference to you, but bear in mind that even if something is merely in possession of a clot of photosensitive cells and a rudimentary sort of lens that is dimly aware when a shadow passes overhead, they might just be as proud of that clot of cells and that rudimentary lens as you are of your own two eyes. You'll need a great deal more skin than you've got now, she added, and you'll be dried out all over, and you'll have 2 limbs on the top half of you and 2 on the bottom, and no more than that. And if you lose one, that's the end of it. There's no growing those back. No one up there abides by the blessed mandate of radial symmetry. Cut one of them in half in either direction, they just fall apart stupidly, never to move again. That will be novel, the girl managed to say, although she looked more than a little pale at the prospect of losing radial symmetry, which she had been catechized? Because it's a catechism? Catechized from her earlier catechized. Then the witch laughed so loud that she fell to the ground and wriggled about. I will prepare a drink for you, which you must swim to land tomorrow before sunrise, and sit on the shore and drink. All manner of things will happen. head, 2 soft cysts to force the air out of your chest, sprout studs of bone all in a line down your back. You will be mammalized, and it will hurt until you are back here with all of us in your own form again. But all who see you will consider you lovely, and you'll be able to open your eyes wide against the sun. If you can bear this, then I can help you." "I can bear this," the girl said. "Most likely," she added, for she had never actually had to bear anything as yet and was only guessing. "Well, I'll give it to you then," said the witch, "but you should be careful, because I don't know much about the undoing of it. And once you become human all over instead of just part way as you are now, and might I say, I like your present form much better, you might become particularized and believe you belong to yourself only instead of in the normal way, you belonging to all of us and we all to you, and never return to the water or your sister's or your father's house or mine. And if you were to fail in winning the prince or his soul, if he were to join with another or hoard his own soul to himself, then you might turn into nothing useful at all. And I should have wasted an afternoon and gone hungry to boot." "Just the same," the girl said, "I make you a new mouth that makes sounds. Not the kind they could understand anyhow. I can make you a mouth that can suck in air and blow it back out again, and a mouth that can eat the right kind of food and swallow it. But I can't make a mouth that can do all that and put a voice in it too. So you won't have one." It was a disappointment. But like any good administrator, the girl never held anyone responsible for their natural limitations. "No voice, then," she agreed. "I'll make up the difference somehow." It was getting to be a great deal of trouble for a single prince, but there was a great deal to be said for doing something unprecedented. At any rate, everything happened exactly as the witch said it would. The girl beached herself in the dark, drank from her little cup, experienced a fair bit of discomfort as her skeleton made itself unknown in new and distressing configurations, tested out her voice, found none, and assessed the situation along with her assets, alive, conscious, in possession of a singleness of purpose, also in possession of eyelids, and disadvantages, unable to change color, one-way joints, and a sudden and profound sense of isolation. Yikes. Then the sun came up. The prince was there, which was remarkably convenient. His eyes were so fixed upon her that she decided she must have uncommonly attractive legs, or else somehow the principle, if not the reality of radial symmetry, was visible in her new form. She found, somewhat to her surprise, that she was rather put off by his obvious approval, given how much trouble she had gone to just to split so much of herself apart. He had not, it had to be said, asked her to suffer this for him, and so she could not strictly be blamed, but she found herself doing it just the same. The prince asked her who she was and where she came from, and she looked at him with not a little disgust that he did not know. "No point in suffering for someone who hadn't asked you to do it," the witch had said, "but please yourself. He won't recognize what pain looks like on your face, that's for certain." He evidently couldn't recognize disgust either, taking it for a softer emotion and guiding her inside a nearby building. She couldn't help feeling, even in the midst of everything, a little thrill at the prospect of stepping through her first front door. She walked through it as easily as anything, although every step she took was as painful as promised. As far as all that goes, the girl was not from the sort of people who took much interest in cataloging various types of pain, nor would she be interested in the sort of person who was, chiefly because knowing more about something one cannot change is not especially useful. So as far as the girl was concerned, things either hurt or they didn't, and you could either make them stop hurting or you couldn't. Walking her, and the sun boiled hot and furious over the horizon every morning, and the food she ate was bloodless and dry and made her stomach twist up, but you couldn't help any of that, and that's all there was to say about it. At any rate, she couldn't say anything about the pain, and so no one noticed, least of all the prince, who brought her home with him in a careless sort of way, and covered her in clothes and smiled at her and gestured broadly at a small stuffed sort of bed that was evidently meant for her to use and not to be shared. Give me a second. He seemed to have a frenzy for clothes shared by all members of the administration. The girl could scarcely walk from one room to the next without being frantically presented with clothes by someone or another. It was strange, the girl thought, that the prince had not yet bothered to thank her for coming to see him, for rearranging her skin, for all the suffering she was enduring for him, simply because he had not asked her to and did not know why she did it. It seemed to her that he was much nicer when he had been drowned and his eyes closed, but that did not make her love him any less. He simply had a great deal to be taught. The prince kept her near him at all times and was forever tipping her chin up with his two longest fingers as if he remembered having his face pointed to the sky as she swam him to the shore. Mabel, you need to calm down. Her little stuffed bed sat just inside the door to his own room, and she slept when he slept, like a favorite dog. Where he went, she went, but never to assist or facilitate, merely to attend. There'd been plenty of activity at the beginning over whether the girl could speak or was planning on it anytime soon, or whether she should be made to speak or if she belonged to anyone, which she considered a ridiculous question if she belonged to everyone. She expressed no preference one way or the other, and eventually she was left alone about it. They did not seem anxious to find a purpose for her. She was not going to be useful. She was not going to be shared. She was not even going to be eaten. It was with mounting horror that she realized their selfishness extended even to her. She took to sneaking out of her bed after everyone else had gone to sleep and taking the steps that led down to the sea where she could bathe her feet in salt water and think about her old garden. Once, during the night, her sisters came up linked, arm in arm, chorusing reproachfully at her from the water, and she tried to tell them how severely she had overestimated her ability to make something constructive out of suffering. But she had the wrong sort of mouth and no voice to tell them. After that, they came to the same place every night, and she threw crusts of bread for them to eat, and their bright hair flashed in the lamplight as they lunged to snatch it from the waves with their teeth. After she ran out of bread, they would bob around sullenly until she spread her arms wide in apology. Then they would vanish. As the days passed, she caught herself clinging to the prince more often, and his arms would easily around her, but it never entered his head to forget the two parents who made him, or to make all his thoughts her thoughts, or to wed her with his full heart, or give any sort of part of his soul to her, which was exceedingly frustrating. Sometimes the girl would look at him very hard and try to ask, "Do you not love me yet?" with her eyes, and she thought if she had any luck at all, he would begin to find her necessary. She had no luck at all and began to despair of her plan entirely. So she began instead to consider how to minimize her losses. She did not blame the prince. He was not to blame for her limitations, but she began to think about how she could love him more efficiently. It so happened that very soon the prince had to marry, which was a great relief to the girl, who was beginning to wonder whether the leadership of his country cared about the perpetuation of daughters in the slightest. Then it was said that the particular daughter of a particular neighbor was to be the bride. This struck the girl as unnecessary. Why favor specificity over proximity? But as she was merely a guest and had not been invited to comment upon their culture, members of the court were put on it, and they waddled cautiously out over the sea, hugging the coastline for 3 days. The morning they sailed into the bride's harbor, they were greeted by bells and gunfire and cheering as if the wedding was something that was going to happen to everybody instead of merely 2 people. The bride was brought forth, and the girl had not had time to form an opinion of her before the prince was married. She decided she could love the bride just as easily as she had loved the prince. A fanciful sort of person waved censers about, and the prince and bride clasped their hands together, and the girl held up the bride's train. Once again, she saw lamps being flung up in every corner. Once again, rockets disemboweled themselves in a rush to produce light, although this time she could watch without fear of being blinded. Then there was a great deal of laughter and dancing and motion. The prince never left off putting his fingers all over his bride's face, nor could his bride decide for what purpose she had a mouth. One moment it was crammed with food, the next moment it was smeared against some part of the prince. Eventually the two disappeared into the bridal cabin, and everyone left without milled around aimlessly. The crowd bled members below decks until eventually no one was left above the ship's automated operator at one end and the girl at the other. The girl leaned against the edge of the railing and looked out over the sea for signs of mourning. She saw a group of her sisters rising out of the water, their heads quite naked, for they had cut off all their hair. "Hello again," they said. "Finding you has been awfully tiresome, and we're very eager to go home. Are you ready to go home? We brought you a knife in case you are ready to come home, unless you'd rather die up here and be burnt into ashes. Take it, and visit the prince with it, and let his blood coat your feet, and let them grow back together and have a sensible body again. The grandmother misses you, and your garden is just wild with polyps, and the witch says never mind about the meal, and that she isn't hungry for anything but to see you home again. All our hair is gone. We gave it to the witch so that she could make a knife with it. Well, what have you to say to that?" And they all sighed deeply and mournfully, for they were not used to making such long speeches. The girl tilted her head and waved cheerfully down at them. Then she bound her hair at the back of her neck, pulled her legs back up from the edge of the ship, and disappeared inside the cabin. The girl drew back the curtain, covering the marriage bed, and saw the prince sleeping against his bride's chest. She bent down and kissed his brow, then hers, and then his, then hers again for good measure. It would be too bad to have suffered so without getting the prince for it, but now it was his and his bride's turn to suffer. Since the girl had already done her suffering cheerfully, she saw no reason why they should complain either. The knife jumped a little in her hand, and then it jumped first in the prince's throat, and then his bride's, and a red line trailed after it. Then the girl flung the knife into the sea. "Oh, that's lovely," she said, and she found that she had a voice again and that she was not suffering in the least. "That's so much better. That's wonderful." She wriggled her toes around in the blood and left scrunched up little footprints behind her as she returned to the railing. "Hello, sisters," the girl called out as she waggled her bloody legs over the side. "Oh, but it's a relief to see all of you. I can't begin to tell you the extent of my troubles. I'm covered in little fissions, or fissures, I misremember which, but I'm split all over like a reef, and I can only move in 4 directions, none of them interesting, and I don't care if I ever see another soul as long as I live. I want to come home and be around sensible people and dig up my garden and never have to look at the sun again." Then she looked down to see that she had been fully restored to herself, flexing joyfully in every direction, and found her body just as it had been, and she loved the prince and his bride better than she had ever before. "I'm coming, sisters," she said, and she felt 3 voices humming all at once in her throat, her own and the prince's bride. Her prince now, and her bride too. And she had 2 souls inside her, and they both belonged to her, and she smiled, and she slipped back into the sea. The end. That story's a little bloody. I forgot, but it's like classic Little Mermaid. I hope everyone enjoyed it. I think next I'm gonna read a story from the same book. I have it marked. This one's I think this one's short. Either this one or, oh, hi, Jack. Either this one or that one's a sad one. Gosh, I'm trying to find. Oh, here we go. Okay. I like the ones about, when the daughters get to murder someone. That's very fun. This one's incredibly long. Okay, I'm going to read The Frog Prince. Oh, The Frog's Princess, pardon. Okay. The Frog's Princess. Let me get more water. And excuse my cat, she's just jumping around. I'm live streaming myself reading. I know. In an old time, in an old country, there lived a man whose daughters were all beautiful and unlucky. To be beautiful in this place was to be noticed. It was for this reason his daughters were so remarkably unlucky. Here people prayed to be forgotten, and they prayed with their faces to the floor. It was the man's youngest daughter who was unluckiest of all. He was so beautiful that the sun herself noticed, and had in fact fallen quite in love with him, and never let her rays stray from his face for even a moment while she hung above the rim of the world. So the youngest daughter slept with his face jammed into a pillow and with coverlets piled over his head, but the sun would not let him sleep unnoticed. Every day she found him, and every day she woke him while everyone else was still asleep. Beauty is never private. Beauty does not belong exclusively to you, the man told his daughters. Beauty is a public good, and you are responsible for that. What does that mean exactly? The youngest daughter asked. The sun burned hot on his forehead. It means, in a sense, that according to a certain understanding, you belong to everyone, the man said. The man himself was not beautiful, but he was often covered in beautiful objects, which he considered to amount more or less to the same thing. It is gross. By that reasoning, his daughter said, I belong at least partly to myself, certainly at least as much as I belong to anybody else. Don't be clever, his father said. Go and play outside where people can see you. In this country, a daughter was at least safe at the age when they wished to play, while other people wished to notice them. When people wanted to notice him, the man's youngest daughter had learned nothing could talk them out of it. They noticed, then they offered remark, and then they acted, always in that order. The land near the man's house was very old and thickly wooded. In this forest, beneath a linden tree, there was a well full of standing water. In the heat of the day, when the sun's attentions became unbearable, the man's youngest daughter would run across the highway and into the woods where the trees stood so close together that almost no light reached the ground. Obviously, some light did reach the ground. Otherwise, how else could a well have possibly been built there? It had been by this time abandoned, but in order for a well to be abandoned, it must first have been built. There had once been a move for the layer to have spread itself over old tree throws and root pits given sufficient time. So let us say there was a light sufficient for our present purposes. So that was where the youngest daughter went. Generally, when he did not feel disposed to belong to anyone, and he would sit at the edge of the well in a spot where the brackish layer was not yet thrown down roots. Fuck that sentence so bad. He would take with him a golden ball as round and as yellow as the sun. He would throw it straight in the air, then catch it when it came down. He never threw it in any other direction. This way, he might throw and catch and fling away the sun as easily as he liked. It was his favorite pastime, and he never tired of it. On this day, he leaned over the edge and looked down, but the water was so dark and the well so deep that he could not see the slightest sign that anyone had been there but a scum and mosquitoes. If anyone had tried to console him in that moment, he would have sunk down onto the stone and refused them, but no one did. So he continued to lean over the well, looking down. This is very relatable. You may be wondering why he did not try to fish the ball out of the well himself. You are only wondering this because you have not seen the well with your own eyes. The well's only redeeming feature was its solitude. The water within had not run for years and smelled like old coins. Also, he was not stupid and knew better than to dive into water he didn't know how deep, when there was only one way in or out. Eventually, however, someone came along and noticed his crying, as someone generally did, and called out to him, as someone generally did after noticing him. "What is the matter with you? Yours is a face too beautiful for tears," which is patently untrue, but people said it just the same. He looked around to find the voice and saw that the frog had thrust its flat, wet head out of the well. The frog looked like a calf's heart with a mouth slit across it. "Oh, it's you," he said. "I was crying because I lost something that I love." "Are crying," the frog said. "You haven't stopped yet," which was a fair thing to point out if slightly unkind. "Be still and stop crying. Carry on crying for as long as you like, I suppose. Whichever you prefer. Only I can help you find it." "But you don't know what I've lost," he said. "Oh," the frog said vaguely. "Didn't you mention it?" "I don't believe I did. I'm sure I didn't, actually." "Tell me what it was then," the frog said. "Or better still, I can simply tell you what's in the well that wasn't here an hour ago, and you could tell me if it belonged to you." "Oh," he said. "Yes, oh," the frog said. "I can help you, but what will you give me if I bring back your plaything?" "But I did not ask you to help me," he said, "so why should I promise you anything?" "You are sitting on my well," said the frog. "You are beautiful and you are crying, and I saw you before anyone else did. That is almost the same thing as asking, or being asked anyhow." The frog brushed its long, thumbless hand over his, and the man's youngest daughter had no answer for that. "I don't know what I should promise you," he said. "You can have anything else I own. I could bring you something, if that was something you wanted, and that you could not get for yourself, I suppose. My chain of office that my father gave me." That was all he could think of to offer. The frog said, "Keep your boyish treasures. I don't want them, nor is there anything you can fetch for me I could not get myself. I do not need an errand boy. But if you'll accept me as a companion, and let me sit next to you at your father's table, and eat from the plate you eat from, and drink from your cup, and sleep in your bed, if you'd promise this to me, then I'll dive back into the well and bring your golden ball back to you." "Yikes," the boy said slowly. He thought of his father's words. "You are responsible for your beauty." "Well," he said, "I could promise all this to you if you brought it back to me." He had hoped that maybe the frog was joking, although he had no reason to believe it was. People rarely joked with him. He thought, as he often did before making a promise, that perhaps he would not have to keep it, or that maybe the promise would not be so bad in the keeping as it had been in the making. Maybe a second. It's been 40 minutes. I'm doing considerably better than I did yesterday. But no one was ever joking. I did that already. But no one was ever joking when they asked him to make a promise, and everyone always remembered when he owed them something. And it should be remembered here that he was the youngest daughter after all, and had not yet learned as much about being a daughter as some of the others. At any rate, as soon as the frog heard him say yes, it stopped listening to him and dove back into the water, a dark clot darting swiftly under the surface until it disappeared from sight entirely. A few minutes later, the frog paddled up to the edge of the well with the golden ball bulging between its thin lips and spat it out onto the grass. Its tongue was a livid purple and bulged out of its mouth. The imagery in here is just absolutely disgusting. It's great. But the youngest daughter was too happy to pay much attention to how the frog looked. He was so relieved, in fact, that he picked up the ball immediately and ran for home. "Wait," said the frog, wheezing and dripping. "Take me along. I cannot run as fast as you can. That is not my fault, but yours." He could no longer hear the frog and quickly forgot about it and what it had done for him in the forest. The next day, the youngest daughter was sitting at the table with his father and all his sisters when something, with a lipless mouth and thumbless hands, hauled itself up to the front steps of the house and knocked on the door and called out, "Daughter youngest, open the door for me." So he ran to see who it was and opened the door wide enough to see the frog sitting there, panting from the strain of crawling up the stairs. He slammed the door shut and sat back down at the table. His father saw his face and asked, "Why are you so distressed, and who was at the door?" It was a frog, he said. Then, we are going to have to wash the front steps. Did someone knock on our front door and leave a frog there? His father asked. Or did the frog knock and expect to be let in? Well, said his youngest daughter, I think it wanted to be let in. I did not ask what the frog wanted, his father said. I asked what the frog expected to be let in. All the other daughters had stopped pretending to eat at this point and stared in open excitement at the prospect of watching one of their own number get into trouble. Well, his daughter said, only yesterday when I was sitting near the well in the forest, my golden ball fell into the water. Sitting near the well or on it? On it, father, sitting on it, and my golden ball fell into the water, and I was crying over it, and I was crying so much that the frog brought it back to me, and because it insisted on repayment, I promised him that he could be my companion. But I did not think it would be possible for the frog to leave the well, because don't frogs have to live in the water? And now it is sitting outside the door and wants to come in? If you are sitting on the well and not just near it, his father said, then you must keep your promise. Just then, there came another knock at the door. But I did not really promise to escape notice. He really was a very unlucky daughter. His father said only, you should not have sat, I closed the book by accident. You should not have sat on a well that was not yours. Go and open the door and let the frog in. He went back to the door and opened it, and the frog hopped inside, then followed him back to his chair. It sat at his feet a moment and then said, lift me up next to you. He did not move until his father insisted. Then he did it. The frog sat next to his hand on the table and said, now push your plate closer to me. Only that he did as instructed. Everyone else could see that he did not want to eat, but no one said anything as they were not the ones in trouble. The frog ate everything with a hearty appetite. Eat, his father said, and he ate too. Finally, the frog said, I have eaten everything I wanted to eat. Now I'm tired. Carry me to your room and put me in your bed so that we can go to sleep. The man's youngest daughter began to cry. This time, no one said anything about his being too beautiful for tears. Maybe you would prefer a little bed of your own, he said. Mine is starched and dry, and you might not be comfortable in something so clean. I could make you a little nest or put some water in a bucket nearby or put me in bed. You took help when it was offered, and you flinched now at repayment. Do not make use of someone else's property, and do not offer someone your beauty if you do not intend to repay them in kind. Now the youngest daughter wished that he could throw his ball back in the well and never see it again. I would rather have a punishment than receive a favor like this again, he said. Rather all you like, his father said. Only stop making me tell you what you already know. I have other daughters to manage, not only you. So the youngest daughter picked up the frog with 2 fingers and held it out before him. His skin puckered wherever it touched him. What about my chores, he asked, knowing full well he was stalling. You have your chore before you, his father said. Everything else can wait. He carried the frog upstairs and set it in a corner of his room where it sat and stared at him. Next, he got into bed without looking at it, but as he was lying under the blankets, it came creeping up to the foot of the bed. The frog said, I'm tired and I want to sleep too. Pick me up and put me in bed with you or I'll tell your father. This is one request too many, and the youngest daughter became violently angry and shook all over. He threw back the blankets, picked up the frog, and flung it hard against the wall as hard as he could. Here is your payment, and here is your thanks. Now keep your peace. The frog slid down to the floor and began to croak. It croaked louder and louder until his father filled the doorway and picked the frog up himself and placed it in bed with his daughter. Then he left, closing the door behind him without saying a word. The frog was all the softer for having been thrown against the wall. It crawled underneath his legs, cold and close, and pressed a lipless kiss against the back. The daughter wished that all his skin was gone. By and by, the frog fell asleep, and the boy lay awake and staring all night, and for many nights afterward. He was very unlucky. The end. I forgot that one has like a depressing ending. I mean, most of these do, I think. I might get more water and transition to Kelly Link. Here down. Okay. Yeah, I might transition to Kelly Link. Let me get more water, and then we'll move on. Give me a moment. although the tea isn't hot anymore. Ugh. Let's see if I can. Oh, Jen's listening. You're so sweet, Jen. Okay. Your connection is bad. You know what, Jen? Maybe it is yours. Okay. Wait, this is the other one. Okay, this one's kind of mine. Oh, it's mine. Maybe if I move, because I'm super far from our Wi-Fi box thing. Jen, I'm not gonna read text from you while I'm trying to read out loud. I'm gonna try it here. Tell me if that fixes anything. Y'all should have told me that the connection wasn't good. Okay. Jen, everyone can see your messages in the chat. Mabel might join us. Okay, so this is from Get in Trouble, which is Kelly Link book. I really like. She does a bunch of short stories. I actually think my favorite short stories she wrote are, I have them at home. Yeah, this is Mabel. I don't know what she's doing. Okay. She doesn't rip open presents. She's always been careful with her things, even the things that don't matter. Emmy is a ripper, but this is not Emmy's present, not Emmy's birthday. Sometimes Emmy thinks that this may not be Emmy's life. Better luck next time around, Emmy, she tells herself. Ainsley scores under the tape with a fingernail, then carefully teases the pink wrapping paper out from under the coffin-shaped box. Ainsley's new boyfriend is in there. Ainsley's birthday this year is just Ainsley and her bestest, oldest friends. Just Ainsley, Sky, Elin, and Emmy. No family allowed. No boys. Earlier, there was sushi and cake and lots of pictures to put up online so that everyone will know how much fun they are having. No presents, Ainsley said, but of course, Emmy and Elin and Sky bring presents. No one ever means them when they say that, not even Ainsley, who already has everything. It's normal to want to give your best friend something because you love her, because you want her to know that you love her. It isn't a competition. Ainsley loves Elin and Emmy and Sky equally, even if Emmy and Ainsley have been friends longer. Emmy's heart isn't as big as Ainsley's heart. Emmy loves Ainsley best. She also hates her best. She's had a lot of practice at both. They're in the sunroom, as if you could keep the sun in a room, Emmy thinks. Well, if you could, Ainsley's mother probably would. But the sun has gone down. The world is night, and it belongs to all of them, even if it belongs to Ainsley most of all. Ainsley's brought out dozens of pillar candles, a small forest of mirrored candelabras, both of her boyfriends. Boyfriend with a capital. They both wear little birthday hats because that's the thing about boyfriends, according to Elin, who has a lot of opinions and isn't shy about sharing them. You can't take them too seriously. Of course, anyone can have an opinion. Emmy has plenty. In her opinion, in order not to take a boyfriend seriously, you have to have a boyfriend in the first place. And Ainley has 1, 2, 3. Creatures of the night in silly hats. Vampire boyfriend, Oliver, and werewolf boyfriend, Alan, lounge on candy-striped settees and gaze with identical longing at their girlfriend, Ainsley. Emmy decides against having a second piece of cake. One piece of cake really ought to be enough for anyone. And yet, there on the floor, right under the cake, plenty left, Emmy, why not have another piece, really? And the candelabras, right there under everyone's noses, the new boyfriend has been waiting all this time. Emmy knew right away, as soon as she came into the sunroom, exactly what boyfriend it would be. It's dark inside the box, of course. Night wrapped up in pink, yeah, Alan, yeah, in pink paper. Are his eyes open or closed? Can he hear them talking? Love will wake him. Love, oh love, terrible, wonderful love. Ainsley lifts the lid of the coffin, and white rose petals spill out all over the floor, and, oh, Sky says, he's gorgeous. Real rose petals, and crushed and bruised. Probably not the best packing material, but oh, what a smell is filling the room. Not night after all. The boyfriend's eyes are close parted just a little, like he's just been kissed. Which one is he? Elin said. The ghost one, Emmy says. Ainsley reaches out, touches the ghost boyfriend's face, brushes a piece of hair back from his eyes. So soft, she says. So weird. Fake boyfriend, real hair. Still stuttering? R.I.P. Let's try to read in the kitchen. Sorry about that. It's a work in progress, though. Although Katie might come in here and try to warm something up, so we'll see how that goes. Sit on the floor in the kitchen. Okay. This might be better. It's closer to the router. I thought they weren't selling those anymore, Elin says. They're not, Emmy says. Her chest feels very tight, as if she's suddenly full of poison. You have to keep it all inside, like throwing yourself on a bomb to save everyone else. Except you're the bomb. Guest stars. Yeah. Says without a trace of discernible malice. She scoops out handfuls of petals, throws them at Ainsley. They all throw rose petals. When Emmy reaches into the coffin, she tries very hard not to let her hand brush against Ainsley's ghost boyfriend. What are you going to call him? Elin says. Don't know, Ainsley says. She's reading the instructions. So there are two modes, apparently. Embodied or spectral. Embodied is just, the usual thing. She waves a hand in the direction of her vampire boyfriend, Oliver. He waves back. In spectral mode, it's like a movie projection, and he floats around. You can hang out with him like that, but it's random or something, like he comes and goes. Huh, Sky says. So if you can't see him all the time, but maybe he's watching you? What if you're getting dressed on the toilet or something, and all of a sudden he's there? Maybe that's why they did the recall, Elin says. She's tearing a white petal into littler and littler pieces and smiling, like that's her idea of fun. You can customize him, Manley says. If you have a thing that belonged to someone who died, there's a compartment somewhere, inside his mouth. You put something in it. I don't know. That part seems kind of dumb, like if you're really supposed to believe in ghosts or something. That's not supposed to be a good idea, Emmy says. That's the reason they did the recall, remember? There were a lot of stories. People are so impressionable, Ainley says. Yeah, Jen, I'm now on the floor just for better connection. So turn him on already, Elin says. No pun intended. What's the rush, Ainsley says. We have to come up with a name first. They debate names for the new boyfriend while Ainsley opens friend presents. They take more pictures, Ainsley holding the bottle of absinthe that Sky made from a recipe online. They throw rose petals at her, so there are petals caught in her hair. It's very pretty. No, it's not. It's closer to my Wi-Fi router is the point. Oliver and Alan in their hats, Ainsley sitting on Oliver's lap. They change out Alan's boy head for his wolf head. He can't talk with the wolf head on, but he's still very cute in his tuxedo. Cuter than most real boys. More pictures. The new boyfriend in his box. Ainsley leaning over to kiss him. Ainsley wearing the red suede boots her grandmother sent. Ainsley holding up the tickets that Elin got her to some show by some band they're both into. 2 tickets, one for Ainsley and the other for Elin, of course. Emmy isn't really into music. Sky for the hollow of Ainsley's white throat. The beads are cut glass and jet. There's a secret in the locker. The choker is in a little box in a pocket in Emmy's purse, and she doesn't take it out. She pretends to search for it, and then she says to Ainsley, "Uh-oh, I think I left your present at home, maybe?" Ainsley says, "Whatever, Emmy. Give it to me on school Monday." She passes around the homemade absinthe, and they all drink straight from the bottles. That way, Emmy figures, it's harder for everyone else to tell if you're only taking little sips or even only pretending. It's a little bit herbal and a little bit like toothpaste. You could call him Vincent, Sky says. She's looking at baby names on her phone. Or Bran, Banquo, Tor, Foster. Maybe not Foster. But it ought to be something old-fashioned. Ghost names ought to be old-fashioned. Because nowadays no one ever dies, Ainley says and swigs from the absinthe bottle. Fake swig, spets Emmy. Let's all get fake drunk and have fake fun with Ainsley and her fake boyfriends, because she's fairly sure that all of this is fake, this whole night, the way she finds herself acting around Ainsley and Elin and Sky tonight, maybe this whole year. And if it's not fake, if it's all real, this fun, this friends, this life, then that's even worse, isn't it? Emmy has no idea why she's in such a horrible mood, except, wait, no. Let's be honest, she knows. She's in a horrible mood because she's a horrible friend who wants everything that belongs to Ainsley. Except maybe Ainsley's mother. Ainsley can keep her mother. Emmy has wanted a boyfriend ever since they came out, even before Ainsley knew about them. Emmy was the one who told Ainsley about them, and then Ainsley had Oliver and Alan, and then you could buy the limited edition Ghost Boyfriend, and then there was the recall, and you couldn't get a Ghost Boyfriend anymore, so that was okay, because then even if Emmy couldn't have a Ghost Boyfriend, Ainsley couldn't have one either. Except now she does have one. Emmy wants a Ghost Boyfriend more than she's ever wanted anything. What about Quentin? That's a good name, Sky says. 2. Anyway, Emmy's the one who broke up with Justin, and Justin is the one who can't get over it. And anyway, Elin is the one who still has a thing for him. My Ghost Boyfriend, I can call him whatever I want. Weirdish, Elin says, but okay. Come on, Ainsley says. So they all go over and stand around the box, and then Ainsley leans down and sticks her fingers into the Ghost Boyfriend's hair, moving them around until evidently she's found the right place. His eyes open. He has really pretty eyes. Long lashes. He looks at them, each in turn. His lips part just a little like he's about to say something, but he doesn't. Emmy is blushing. She knows she's blushing. Hi, Ainsley says. I'm your girlfriend, Ainsley. You're Mint. You're my boyfriend. The new boyfriend's eyes flutter shut, eyelashes like black fans, skin just like skin. Even his fingernails are perfect and so real as anything Emmy has ever seen. When his eyes open again, he only looks at Ainsley. Okay, so we'll see you later, Ainsley says. She straightens up and says to Emmy and Elin and Sky, you guys want to put on some music and dance or something? Wait, Elin says. What about him? I mean, it. Are you just going to leave it there? It takes him a while to wake up the first time, Sky says. Sky has a biblical handmaiden, Esther. Sky's parents were kind of religious for a while. Oh yeah, Ainsley says. There's one other thing. We have to choose a mode, embodied or spectral. What do you think? Embodied, Elin says. Embodied, Sky says. Spectral, Emmy says. Okay, Ainsley says. Spectral, might as well. She reaches back down and runs her fingers through her boyfriend's hair again. There. Now let's go out on the deck and dance in the moonlight. Come on. Oliver, Alan, you too. Ainsley and Elin DJ. The moon is perfectly round and bright. The night is warm. Ainsley tells Oliver and Alan to dance with Emmy and Sky, which is the kind of thing Ainsley does. She isn't ever selfish. You have to have things in order to be generous with them, right? Emmy and Oliver dance. She's in his arms, really, his hand on the small of her back. It's sort of a waltz that they're doing, which doesn't really suit whatever song this is, but Oliver can do either the waltz or the tango, or a kind of sway standing there dance. Sorry, Alan. Not that this is strictly speaking necessary. Oliver always asks the same questions. Sure, she says. Then, well, I don't know, not really. I could be happier. I'd like to be happier. Why not? If you can't be honest with your best friend's vampire boyfriend, who can you be honest with? Vampires are all about secrets and unhappiness. Jin, I don't know how to fix this problem. We'll do better tomorrow. Well, I'll probably read a couple more pages of this and then be done. And then I'll reboot the router for tomorrow. Now says, he presses her more firmly against his body, nuzzles her hair. How can I be happy if you're not? Ainsley's your love, not me, Emmy says. She really isn't in the mood. Besides, sometimes it's just really too weird playing pretend eternal love with a borrowed boyfriend when what you really want is your own boyfriend. It would be so much nicer to have your own. So I mean, don't be unhappy on my account. As you wish, Oliver says. I shall be unhappy on my own account. How happy it makes me, oh delicious one, to be unhappy together with you. He clasps her even tighter in his arms until she has to ask him to ease up just a little. It's a fine line between cuddles and being squeezed like a juice box, and vampire boyfriends sometimes cross right over the line, maybe without even noticing. There is also the endless hovering and the endless brooding and all the endless talk about how delicious you are and eternity, and they like you to read poetry at them, the old-fashioned rhyming kind even. It's supposed to be educational, okay? Like the way werewolf boyfriends go on and on about the environment and also are always trying to get you to go running with them. Oh, there's a little break there. That's perfect. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. Thank you for listening. I think it was just Alan and Jack and Danny. I will see you tomorrow, for which I will reboot my router and try again. Thank you for coming. I'll be here reading whether or not people listen. So, okay. I love you all. Good night.